Hello, travelers. Welcome to Reach the World's Explorer program. For over 20 years, Reach the World has inspired youth to become curious, confident, and compassionate global citizens through virtual exchange. My name is Tim, and I'm so glad you're here. Let's get to it today. I'm so excited. Today is the first of several video calls with professional photographer and adventurer Julianne Goran. Julianne has traveled the world as an artist and a storyteller, and she's joining Reach the World to tell the story of her 1,000-mile biking expedition across Zambia, Botswana, and Namibia in Southern Africa. So through written articles and these live stream events, we're going to follow this expedition for about the next 6 weeks. And you can find a complete listing of upcoming events, other great at-home learning resources, and much more on our website. It's at athome.reachtheworld.org, athome.reachtheworld.org. We're also going to add a direct link to Julianne's virtual exchange expedition in the chat bar on Reach the World's YouTube page if you're following us there. And speaking of that, I want to welcome the teachers and students who are joining us live today. Please feel free to use the YouTube chat bar to let us know you're here, where you're joining from, and of course to share any questions you have for Julianne as we go. We'll get to as many questions as we can in the next 30 to 45 minutes, but today we're really just going to introduce this expedition and get to know Julianne. And so with that, it's time to join the expedition. Julianne, welcome to Reach the World.
Thank you so much. You are like a pro host there.
I've had a little practice. It's great to have you here. It's really nice to speak to you. I'm so excited to introduce your expedition today. You've been working hard on getting your first articles up on the expedition homepage, which my colleague Chris is going to add to the chat bar, a link to that, so our viewers can check those out when they're finished today. But just to get started, can you tell us a little bit about yourself, and then we'll get into the expedition.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for that introduction. So I'm from the Boston area. I grew up there in a family of 4 kids. Neither of my parents were really travelers. They always were a little bit perplexed by my fascination with the away. But I studied design, and my only focus after college was to go overseas. That's all I had a plan for. So I spent the next 10 years after college basically taking jobs because I had to pay somehow to live in different countries, living wherever I could get a job and traveling. And then came back to the US for a little bit to help out my mom, which we'll probably get to. And then the last few years became a professional storyteller, so photographer and filmmaker, and have used that as a means to pay for my adventures.
Very cool. I like your background because you just have a raw, like, explorer spirit. You're curious about the world around you. Doesn't particularly matter where. You're just up for adventure, and that's probably sort of what brought you to this idea of biking 1,000 miles across a couple different South African countries. Do you want to tell us how that expedition or your participation in it came to be?
Yeah, no, it's very much typical me. I think so my mother had Alzheimer's. I guess that's a very important part of the story. And I was helping my father care for her. She still has Alzheimer's, but she's in a home now. It got too difficult for us to keep her safe. But I was in a very difficult point in my life. I was having a very hard time. And I felt like I was losing myself a little bit. And for me, when I am struggling, sports and nature are usually what helps me heal. And so I just got this random email that said there was this group that was going to be biking across half of Africa. And something in it just really grabbed me, even though I was afraid of biking, like terrified of biking. And I wrote them and said, hey, I'm a photographer. I'm not yet really a professional, but I'm working on it. If you have a professional, you should probably take them, but I'd like to join you. And they wrote me back and said yes, which was terrifying. But that's very typical. Like, I'll jump into something that I can't take back. And then, you have to figure out how to do it. And that's how you grow. And so I had to get a bike. I didn't even have a bike. I had to train. But that really helped me get to a much better place within my family and with myself and heal.
So what was it about, biking 1,000 miles that appealed to you? Especially, I mean, given,
Yeah.
like you said, you were not an avid biker.
No, I had an accident when I was 15 or 14. I got hit by a car.
Mm.
You know, not their fault, nothing malicious. I just got dinged and I broke my arm and my face and my hand. So I was genuinely very afraid of biking. Um, but I think for me, fear is something to go towards, usually. I don't like having fear be something that has power over me. And so for years, having had friends go out on bike rides and being too afraid to do it, I think somewhere in the back of my head that bothered me. And at the same time, I was living with this fear of losing my mom, which there was nothing I could do about that. And so maybe something about hearing about this crazy adventure, um, and Africa is just this powerful, beautiful place. I think it might have grabbed this fear that I could take on. But I was absolutely terrified. Like I avoided getting a bike for 2 months, and I only had so long to train. Um, and the first few times I went out on my bike, I was like shaking. I was so scared. But it was for me like taking on a fear that you can manage and overcome is very powerful. And for the next almost a year, that was my focus rather than the fact that I was losing my mother. It was the fact that I was learning something and I was taking on this fantastic adventure. And I learned how to bike. So I talked to everyone. I love learning, I love researching. So I only had, I think, 9 months to learn how to bike, to repair a bike, all these things. And I was going to be working, I was photographing. So I just like talked to every single person I could find who was a cyclist. I had some friends who were professionals and interviewed them and geeked out and watched videos and went to the bike shop locally and was like, just teach me. Um, and I think that really helped me move forwards. And it felt like me again. Like I was excited and I was learning. And I like big challenges. If you told me to bike 10 miles, I think I would lose interest. But if you tell me to bike 1,000, somehow that's galvanizing.
Cool. Like speaking of training, what does it take to train? You said you took about 9 months to train for this. What does that look like for someone who is sort of like a leisure biker around their neighborhood, maybe? Like, how is what you were doing different?
Yeah. So again, I started with research because this was not, I've skied. I skied in college, Division 1. So I knew how to work out, but I've never biked. So I did a bunch of research. I watched a bunch of YouTube videos. I talked to some trainers, but I basically started out as the leisure person. I biked like 10 miles the first month, I think. And I was like, oh my gosh. And I was like, oh no, 90 more we did 100-mile days. I was like, I'm not going to do this. I can't, I'm going to fail. But I talked to friends and I started, if I could only do 10 in a day, I did 10 for a few weeks. And I think the big thing for me was that it was more mental than physical. Um, and I already knew that from the challenges with my mother's illness, that I could be the strongest person physically, but if I was being cruel to myself in my head, I wasn't going to be able to bike 5 miles. So I biked, it was October, November, December, and then it started to snow in New England. So then I had to bike like a hamster in my living room on a little trainer that a friend lent me because I didn't have the money to buy one. But whatever I did, my goal was just to get on the bike. And I would try to get a little bit further than the last time. But if I couldn't, my other goal was just to be kind to myself. And that was true, I realized, in Africa too. Like if you are supportive of yourself and compassionate and your best cheerleader, you can do a lot. But if you're doing what I used to do as a younger athlete and being like, Julianne, you're lazy, why aren't you doing this better? Suddenly you can't do anything because you're exhausting yourself mentally.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so that was big. Mental strength, physical.
So the biking is really just one, it's a major aspect of this expedition, but you also have to take into consideration that you are going to be doing it in a very unique place. You are going across, like, touching on 3 different African countries. Had you been to Southern Africa prior to this expedition?
I had only been to South Africa, the country,
Okay.
and really only to Cape Town for 2 weeks during college. And they say South Africa is more like, it's like the Europe of Africa. So yeah, no, definitely when I was training, I was like, why couldn't I have decided to bike across New England or something? Because the other thing that was also for me as challenging as the biking was, for me to be able to afford this trip, I had to have a client. So I photographed for a magazine. And that was still pretty new for me. And it was Entrepreneur Magazine, which is a big business magazine. So one of the women on the trip, she was on the full 70-day trip biking, I want to say 7,000 kilometers from Kenya to Cape Town, or Nairobi, Kenya to Cape Town, South Africa. So she was running her business that whole time. This was before pandemic remote. So I was doing a story about her. So not only was I gonna have to bike, but I was working for a client. So there was a lot of anxiety.
Can you remember, sort of before you left on this expedition, what you thought an average day was going to look like? Try to, like, erase from your mind what you know it was like, and, like, what did you picture an average day of this biking expedition would feel like and look like?
I remember being pretty sure I wasn't going to be able to bike the full distance each day, and knowing that I would have an out because I was photographing. So of course, like, photography takes 2 hands. You can't shoot on the bike. So in my head, I kept thinking, oh, well, if I can't bike 100 or 150 miles, I'll just get in the vehicles. We had support vehicles. So that was big in my head because I was just so, I think the farthest I biked in America before I left was 40 miles because it was still snowing here. So, but I knew we would be camping. I knew it would be very, very hot. I knew that there would be a lot of wildlife, which was exciting, but also a little bit daunting. So for me, a big training thing, like biking for hours in your living room, is not exciting. It's terribly boring. I would put on a really high octane movie, like, I don't know, just a really dumb movie where you don't need to follow the words. It's just things are exploding and car races, and just listen to the noise and bike for 3 hours. But every time I didn't want to get on my bike, I kept remembering there'll be rhinos, there'll be elephants. If you're the slowest one, you're going to be left behind. And so, like, that was literally my training focus. Every time I was too sore, I was like, you just don't want to be the slowest. So I knew that was going to be exciting and a little bit scary, but and I also had, like, a map on my wall, which was a big training thing. I took a huge map of the southern part of Africa, and I put a marker place on each campsite that we knew we were going through, so that I could see, like, this is what I'm working towards, that was really motivating. But then it was almost mind-blowing when I was in those places that I'd been looking at for so many months. I was like, I'm actually in elephant sands or the Makati salt pans. And I remember just, like, my brain was, I'm on the wall map.
I don't know about you, but I love Google Earth. Were you able to use Google Earth to, like, get a snapshot, sort of a preview of what the road looks like and some of these places?
Totally. Yeah, I did that because I needed to know for work. Like, so my client, I was going to pick a segment that was easier on the 70-day trip. And then the client wanted elephants, so she wanted Botswana because Botswana is known for elephants, and that was the section with the longest legs, like longest mileage per day. But so I did use Google Earth to say, okay, this campsite, has good elephants or water, or the roads here are all sand, so maybe I can get sand dune pictures if I bike ahead. But then from a adventure perspective, part of me didn't want to look because I wanted it to be just all magic and surprise. But what I realized was looking on Google Earth didn't ruin anything because it's so different when you're there. It just, yeah, I just kept having these moments of like, I earned this.
Well, let's be like, let's, for our audience, that's really like describe your start point to your end point, sort of at a high level. You crossed 3 countries, but you really spent most of your time in Botswana, right? Can you sort of tell us from where you landed to where you stopped? Generally, if someone's following along on a map, where did your route take you?
Yeah, so I joined the group, which was called, the expedition was called African Spokes. I joined them in Livingstone, Zambia, so right next to the Victoria Falls, which is world famous. And the campsite that we were at there, actually, you could see like the spray from the falls because they're so massive. Yeah, you could see it from our campsite. So I joined them there. I was supposed to have a week to get used to the heat, but my bike got lost somewhere in transit, flying from Boston through Johannesburg to Zambia. So my bike only got there a day before we biked out, but I was just glad to have a bike. So then we biked from there to the river crossing across the Zambezi. I think it was called Kasungu. So we crossed the Zambezi River on ferries. There's a bridge now. But that's at the Chobe National Reserve. And that's in the northeast of Botswana, an amazing place. Then we biked south to Maun, which is sort of the safari headquarters in Botswana, and across the Makadakati salt pans. So this is all sort of the Kalahari Desert. And I actually did get heat stroke because there's no shade, so hot. We actually ended up wearing long sleeve shirts because the sun was just so strong that all your sunscreen melted off. And then from there we went to Namibia, across the border there into Namibia, and biked 2 more days to the capital of Namibia, to Windhoek. And then the crew, they biked south all the way across the red sand dunes in Namibia, and I had to go home, and I was just absolutely crushed. I thought I would have been excited. I was like, it's only 2 weeks. And they biked away and I was crying.
Well, we're really at the beginning of your virtual exchange expedition, and getting a big overview of what you're about to tell us more about is really helpful. If any of our viewers missed any of those spots along the way, rest assured we're going to visit them again in much more detail on Julianne's expedition homepage. We're going to talk more about it. Julianne's going to share a bunch of her amazing photos of these places. So we're really just sort of touching on this, but I wanted to reiterate the fact that you joined a larger expedition for one leg of the expedition, right? Go ahead.
Oh yeah, no, there was a group that started in Nairobi, Kenya. So they biked Nairobi, Kenya to Cape Town, South Africa. So that was about 70 days, 6,500 kilometers. And I only joined for one leg. I think there were 7 legs. But the leg that I did join had the heaviest mileage per day because Botswana's very flat. So they grabbed some mileage there because certain other countries like Malawi and Tanzania are very mountainous. So they weren't able to get as far in those sections per day. And we had a set mileage that we had to achieve per day because people were flying in and out. So when people unfortunately did get sick, which happened, we still had to move forward. We had to break down camp in the morning, bike, or jump in the support truck, and move forwards because we had to cover the ground that we had to cover.
Cool. I want to back up just a little bit because you touched on how challenging it can be to get a bike from Boston to Zambia. What did you bring with you? I mean, how do you even begin to pack for something like this, where I assume you carried some of the stuff you needed in these kind of extreme weather situation?
Yeah, we had a packing list, which was very helpful because the group was in part organized by an outfitter from Kenya. So the Kenyan family who was very familiar with the African bush, which is what they called the wild space, what we would sort of call forests, but they don't have forests in some of the countries we went through. So it's more scrubby, low bushes mostly. So James knew to a degree what we would need, what we could have space for, because we had 2 support trucks that had our kitchen, so to speak. We also had to bring all of our water in those trucks because we were in the desert. But they told us what we needed. So I spent about 2 months getting all my stuff laid out in my living room, which for me, I think preparing for the expedition is at least half the fun of being on the expedition, I think. Because your mind, you're starting to, you get your bike shorts and you get your bike helmet, and we needed the sleeves to protect ourselves from sunburn, and we had bandanas to protect from the sand and the wind. But as you get each of those items or borrow it, you start imagining what it would be like to use it. And I was only on the trip for 2 weeks, but I was preparing and imagining for 9 months. And so in a way, that was even more of the experience, envisioning what each bit would be. But I also had to prepare all my camera gear. I didn't know what our access to electricity would be because we camped. So I had to figure out what that would be, pull that all together. We were in the desert, so I assumed there wouldn't be rain, but I still needed dry bags for the sand, the dust, the dirt. So about the month leading into it, my whole living room was covered with piles, and then you try to remove about a third of it because you put out too many things to bring. Always.
Can you talk about how you solved some of those issues you described? Like, how would you charge your camera battery, or how did you plan to sort of keep your equipment dust free? Specifically, I guess the camera equipment is a real challenge.
Yeah, so we were fortunate on this trip. We had the support vehicle from the Kenyan team, and they actually had solar panels and a large battery, which we were able to charge our phones, and in my case, my camera at night. So when we got into camp, there was this whole routine. You realize, like when I joined, they were like, "This is what you have to do before you pass out at the end of the day. Don't sit down." You put your tent up, you washed yourself if there was a shower, you washed your clothing so that they would dry while the sun was still up, and then you recharged your things, you helped set up the rest of the camp and make dinner, and then you might sit down. And this was after biking 100 miles or 120 miles. But if you sat down, you were never getting up. But so we charged on the truck. For me, I had a whole bag of camera equipment, which I'll show pictures later, that I kept in the front of one of the trucks. One of the crew members helped me with that a lot. He actually sort of became the keeper of my camera stuff. And then some of it was on my bike. And I had very specific bags inside bags. And at night I felt safe most of the time, so I didn't sleep on top of my camera gear. I've been other places where I actually put my camera gear in my sleeping bag. I don't think I did that on this trip, but it was always in my tent, so that at night I checked all my gear. I cleaned it with the little blower and all my wipes, put it out and got it ready for the next morning. And I used my bike clothing as my pillow so that I could just get dressed in my sleeping bag. So yeah, it's very glamorous.
Well, I can't wait. I kind of want to save specific conversation about what you encountered on the trip for some of your upcoming articles and maybe our next video call. But as a preview, can you give us sort of an idea of what you encountered on the road? Like, what were some things that surprised you, and what did you love?
Oh gosh. Well, I manifested, you know how I said I used the megafauna, the large animals of Africa as a training tool to like, Julianne, you have to get back on your bike. I manifested that. So I did have an experience with a bull elephant on the road, which was amazing. But I think gosh, every time I saw an elephant, and Botswana is a haven for elephants, it turns out they actually know the boundary of the country because historically they can't be hunted there, and they're so smart. I mean, they're just brilliant. They know, and they tell each other. They come into Botswana to be safe. So it's the richest area for elephants. But we saw so many herds, so many bulls alone, and every single time it just still was like shivers, because they're so smart and they didn't know what our bikes were. They couldn't quite figure us out. The animals were everything. It was awesome. We would just count our days by animals.
For any of our live stream viewers who are here, and I see there are some people watching today, it's great to have you here. If you have any questions for Julianne, please pop them in the chat sidebar. I'd be happy to pass them along to her. You're going to have more chances to do it in upcoming live streams with Julianne, so you'll have your chance if you're feeling shy today. But if anything that she's saying is really striking a chord with you or inspiring a question, please be sure to share it. I'd be happy to pass it along. I have plenty of questions for Julianne, so I can just go on and on and on, but I'd love to give students a chance too. For any of our viewers, Julianne, who have been to a zoo and have maybe seen an elephant in captivity, can you describe the difference, what it's like to come across an elephant in the wild versus seeing one at a zoo?
Yeah. Oh my gosh. That's a great question. It's so different because the elephant's in charge. This was the elephant's land, it's the elephant's home. It's not my home. That was very evident all the time. There were actually signs at the few rest stops that we passed for vehicles that said, wildlife area, get out of your vehicle at your own risk. Meanwhile, we're biking by these signs, So it's the elephant's home, and it's up to the elephants if they want to engage with us. And we we mostly saw their butts. We always joked, we were like, elephant butt, because they would, they'd be like, human, and they just sort of turned away. And that was kind of awesome because they chose. In a zoo, I think zoos are good for education. I think it's important to help us care about animals, but it's not up to the animal to engage or leave. And like we passed all these herds of elephants, and their trunks would go up like periscopes, and they'd follow us because they were smelling us. They were trying to see what are those things rolling by that aren't trucks. And you just knew that they were having interesting thoughts and talking to each other. And there's so much data that elephants communicate like whales, but at a different level of sound. It's like deeper. So that was just very humbling, I would say. We had a few campsites that had elephants in them, and it was humbling. We're small.
Especially when you're in a tent and there's
Yes.
elephants roaming.
Yes. Yeah.
Well, I'm very excited to get much more into the wildlife of Botswana with you. I'm sure that biking and being on the ground amongst these magnificent animals, big and small, was quite an experience, and we're going to really try to capture that in this virtual exchange expedition. We did have a question from online, and I wanted to pass it along. One of our viewers, you had talked about like about 100 miles per day, right? Was the average.
Yeah.
What was the longest day you had, and what was the shortest within the 2 weeks of your participation?
Yeah, it's a great question. So the first day was the shortest day, but it was the longest I'd ever biked. The first day when we left Livingston, I think it was about 75 miles. And before that, I think the farthest I'd biked was 45 miles. So everyone else was like, oh, it's a rest day. And I was like, oh my God. So that went well, and then the longest day that they biked, I think 150. So everything was in kilometers, and then we had to convert to miles because, in Africa and most of the world, they measure in kilometers. We were on the other side of the road there. It's some of the countries we passed through are British colonies. So there was some conversions going on, but I rode in the support vehicle at the first leg of the day to take photographs from the truck. And then I would have all my bike clothing on. My bike would be on the back. And as soon as we got to the first rest stop where we would all refuel and refill our water, I put my camera away, jump on my bike. So I think the day they did like 175, I did 140. Yeah.
Wow.
I have a picture.
on a flattish road, how long does it take to bike 140 miles? Like, give us some perspective on that.
I think that was an 8 or 9 hour day. Yeah, it was very interesting. You have a lot of time to go through a lot of mental, I can't do this. I don't want to do this. Wait, I signed up for this. Like so much quiet in your head. And I met a lot of people on the trip, wonderful friends. So then we would try to talk and distract each other and tell stories. But I think, the mental challenges were the hardest things. And then your bottom gets very sore, like very, very sore.
Well, for all of our viewers and for all of the participants in this virtual exchange expedition, I want to push you in the direction of Julianne's first couple articles, because I thought you did a great job of describing the joy of a physical challenge like this, and the appeal of a long time on the road to just sort of be alone with yourself and think all of those thoughts that you just described, and really the euphoria or the happiness at the end at achieving such an incredible goal. So we're going to get into that. We're going to get into what you saw along the way. This has been a really fantastic overview of what's to come. We're, just to recap for our participating classrooms, this is going to be a 6-week virtual exchange expedition. Julianne is going to be writing, she's already begun writing some great articles, and we're going to talk about this expedition from a lot of different angles. And in between, we'll do a couple more video calls so that teachers and students have a chance to ask Julianne questions based on those articles. So we have a lot more to go. This is like the first day of a 1,000-mile bike ride, if you want to think about it that way. I would like to thank you very much, Julianne, for joining us today. That's about as much time as we have. I want to thank our entire YouTube live stream audience for joining us now, and those of you who are going to watch this recording a little bit later with your classmates. We're glad to have you on this expedition journey. You can check out a complete calendar of upcoming events at athome.reachtheworld.org. And of course, please go visit Julianne's virtual exchange homepage. You can see her new articles, you can see her amazing photos, and they're going to be popping up each week now for the next couple weeks. So we will see you next time on the next video call. And for now, Julianne, thanks for joining us.
Yeah, thank you so much. I think I really appreciate this, and I hope people are inspired. This was not my area of expertise, and I went for it. So I look forward to talking with you more.
Awesome. We'll see you again soon.
Thank you.